Montana Territory, November 1885. The storm came down from the Rockies like God's own wrath, snow thick as wool, wind sharp as broken glass. In a cabin 12 miles from anywhere that mattered, a woman knelt on rough-hewn floorboards, one hand pressed to her swollen belly, the other gripping a Winchester rifle she barely knew how to fire. Clara Brennan, 23 years old, 7 months pregnant, widow. Outside, 12 men circled like wolves. She could hear them, boots crunching through snow, voices low and hard, the metallic click of hammers pulling back. The cabin walls were pine logs, solid enough, but pine burns, and she could smell the coal oil they'd splashed against the door. Behind her, deeper in the cabin's single room, a man stood with his back to the stone fireplace. Tall, lean, a Colt .45 in each hand. His name was Gideon Rivers, and 24 hours ago, Clara didn't know he existed. Now he was the only thing between her and a shallow grave in frozen ground. Miss Brennan, the voice came from outside, loud enough to carry over the wind. Cyrus Hartley, sheriff of Devil's Creek, the man who'd killed her husband. You got 1 minute to send that child out here. 1 minute, and we let you walk away. Clara's hand tightened on the rifle. The baby kicked hard, insistent, as if it knew. They're lying, Gideon said. His voice was Texas drawl, smoothed down by too many years of saying nothing. Cyrus doesn't leave witnesses. Clara knew. She'd known since the night they found Emmett's body at the bottom of Copper Canyon Mine. Since the moment Cyrus stood in her doorway with his hat in his hands and his lies on his tongue, telling her it was an accident, bad timber, a tragedy. These things happen in mining towns. She'd known. But knowing and proving are different animals. 30 seconds, Clara, Cyrus again. Closer now. Run that baby out or we burn you both. The baby. That's what this was about. Not vengeance, not justice, just a child. An unborn child whose mere existence made Clara Brennan the legal owner of 50 acres of Montana land worth more than most men would see in 10 lifetimes. If we die here, Clara started. We're not dying here. Gideon didn't look at her when he said it. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, on the window, on the knife-edge moment before everything went to hell. But I need you to promise me something. What? No matter what happens, no matter what you see, you stay alive. For that baby, for Emmett, you stay alive. Clara wanted to laugh or scream, or both. Instead, she said the only true thing left in the world. I don't know how to do this alone. You won't be alone. The door exploded inward. Gun smoke and firelight and the roar of men who'd decided talking was done. And somewhere in the chaos, Clara Brennan, 23, widowed, pregnant, and more terrified than she'd ever been in her short life, pulled the trigger. But to understand why that bullet mattered, you have to go back. Back 8 weeks. Back to the day a stranger rode into Devil's Creek looking for a dead man's wife. Back to the beginning. 8 weeks earlier, September 1885. Montana in September is a liar. The days burn hot enough to crack leather, but the nights whisper warnings of the winter to come. Devil's Creek sat in a valley between mountains that looked like broken teeth, gray stone, sharp edges, no mercy for the weak. 300 souls called it home. Most worked the Copper Canyon Mine. The rest fed off the ones who did saloons, boarding houses, the general store that charged twice what things cost in Helena, because Helena was 4 days' ride and a man gets thirsty before 4 days. The mine was owned by a company back east, men in suits who'd never touched a pickaxe. But the town belonged to Cyrus Hartley, sheriff, landowner, the kind of man who smiled when he shook your hand and counted your fingers when you pulled away. Gideon Rivers rode into town on a buckskin mare dust on his coat, 3 days' worth of beard on his jaw. He was 29 years old and looked older, the way men do when they've seen things they can't unsee. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office. A sign hung crooked on the door. Deputy wanted. $40 per month. $40 wouldn't buy much, but Gideon wasn't here for money. He pushed open the door. Cyrus Hartley sat behind a desk made of good oak, too good for a sheriff in a mining town. His boots propped on the desk's edge were polished. His vest was silk. The badge on his chest looked almost like an afterthought. Help you. Cyrus didn't move. Didn't stand, just watched Gideon with eyes the color of creek water in shadow. Deputy job still open. Gideon kept his hands visible, not threatening, not yet. Might be. Cyrus took a cigar from a wooden box, lit it slow. Depends. You got experience. Texas Ranger. 3 years. U.S. Marshal after that. Why'd you quit? Gideon had prepared for this question, had the lie ready smooth as Riverstone. But something in Cyrus's eyes made him tell the truth instead. Got tired of burying people I was supposed to protect. Cyrus smiled, not friendly, just showing teeth. Well, hell, you'll fit right in. They shook hands. Cyrus's grip was firm, practiced, the handshake of a man who'd learned politics. But his knuckles were scarred. The hands of someone who'd also learned violence. One rule in Devil's Creek, Cyrus said. Keep the peace, how you do it there, that's your business. But the peace gets kept, we clear 'em it clear. Good, you start tomorrow. There's a room above the saloon, $12 a month. Tell Martha I sent you, she'll set you up. Gideon nodded, turned to leave. Rivers, he stopped. Where you from, originally? Before Texas. Nowhere that matters. Everything matters in a small town. You'll learn that fast. Gideon left without answering. Outside, the afternoon sun had turned the street to brass. A few miners walked past, shoulders bent like question marks, faces gray with exhaustion. At the end of the street, smoke rose from the stamp mill, where ore got crushed to powder. He'd made it 3 steps toward the saloon when a woman's voice cut through the heat. You're the new deputy. Gideon turned. She stood in the doorway of a dress shop, hand-painted sign above her head reading, Sutton and Daughters, Fine Clothing. Young, maybe 20, dark hair pulled back severe. Flour dust on her apron, which meant she'd been baking, not sewing. Word travels fast, Gideon said. In a town this size, you could have whispered it to your horse, and half of Devil's Creek would know by supper. She stepped into the street, studied him the way you'd study a horse before buying. You look like you've killed men. It wasn't a question. I look like a lot of things. Do you plan to kill anyone here? Not if I can help it. She seemed to consider this, then abruptly, my sister needs help, legal help, the kind a deputy might provide, if he was the helping type. What kind of trouble? The kind named Cyrus Hartley. Gideon went very still. He'd been in town 40 minutes and already the ground was shifting under his feet. Your sister have a name, Clara Brennan, widow. Husband died 6 weeks ago in the mine. Cyrus wants to buy her land. She doesn't want to sell. He's persistent. Persistent how? The woman's jaw tightened. The kind of persistent that ends with accidents. Fires. Women getting hurt trying to defend what's theirs. And you think I can help because you're not from here. You don't owe Cyrus anything yet. And because, she looked at him hard, searching for something. Because men who've killed before know when it's necessary, and when it's murder dressed up as law. Gideon should have walked away, should have said this wasn't his fight, that he'd come to Devil's Creek to bury the past, not dig up someone else's trouble. But something in the way she said murder made him think of Emmett Brennan, the name in the letter he'd received 3 weeks ago, the letter that brought him here. Where can I find your sister? Brennan Farm, 3 miles east. Follow the creek until you see the cabin with green shutters. She paused. Her name's Clara, and Mr. Rivers, she doesn't know you're coming, so when she points a shotgun at your chest and she will don't take it personal. The Brennan farm sat at the bend where Devil's Creek turned north toward the mountains. 50 acres of good grazing ran, a stand of cottonwood trees, and a cabin that looked like it had been built by a man who knew his trade. Gideon approached, slow hands visible, making noise so he wouldn't startle whoever was inside. The door opened before he reached the porch. A woman stepped out, shotgun in her hands, belly round beneath a simple cotton dress, hair the color of creek mud after rain pulled back in a braid that had come half undone. Clara Brennan. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, dark circles under eyes that might have been pretty once before grief and fear moved in permanent. Close enough. Her voice was steady, but the shotgun wasn't. State your business. My name's Gideon Rivers. I'm the new deputy in Devil's Creek. Your sister thought you might need... I don't need law. Law works for Cyrus. She raised the shotgun an inch. Turn around. Go back to town. Tell my sister I'm fine. Are you fine, Mrs. Brennan? Something flickered across her face, not anger. Something harder to name. Then it was gone, replaced by the blankness of someone who'd learned to show nothing. I'm alive. That'll have to be enough. Gideon should have left. Any sensible man would have. But he'd ridden 200 miles based on a letter from a dead man, and sensible had stopped mattering somewhere back in Texas. Your husband wrote to me, he said, 3 months ago, said he was working the mine, said he'd found something wrong, something dangerous. Asked if I'd come investigate if anything happened to him. Clara's hands tightened on the shotgun. Emmett's been dead 6 weeks. You're a little late. I know. Letter took time to reach me. I came as soon as I could. Well, you wasted a trip. Emmett's buried. Mine's closed. Whatever he found died with him. Did it? The question hung between them like smoke. Clara stared at him, and Gideon saw it, the war happening behind her eyes. The desperate need to trust someone fighting against 6 weeks of learning that trust gets you killed. Finally, she lowered the shotgun. Not all the way. Just enough. You hungry? Inside the cabin smelled like bread and wood smoke. Simple furniture table, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner. Everything clean, everything exactly where it should be. The kind of order a woman builds when order is the only thing she can control. Clara set coffee on the table. Didn't sit, just stood with her back to the stove, one hand resting on her belly in that unconscious way pregnant women do. Emmett died August 15th, she said. Mine collapse. They told me it was an accident. Bad timber supporting the shaft. Said 3 men died, my husbands Samuel Cole and Thomas Wright. All good men, all with families. Gideon sipped the coffee. Strong, bitter, good. You believe it was an accident? No. The word came fast, hard, like she'd been holding it in her mouth for 6 weeks waiting for someone to ask. Why not? Because Emmett knew timber. 8 years in mines, he could tell good wood from bad by the smell. He wouldn't have worked a shaft with rotten supports. She crossed to the window, looked out at the land her husband died for. And because the night before he died, he told me he'd found something. Evidence that Cyrus was selling bad timber to the mine at good timber prices, pocketing the difference. How much difference? $6 per beam, 400 beams. You do the math. Gideon did. $2,400, enough to buy a small ranch, enough to kill for if you were the killing type. And Cyrus Hartley was definitely the killing type. This evidence Emmett found gone. He hid it somewhere in the mine, wrote a letter to the U.S. Marshal in Denver, was going to send it the day after he died. Clara turned from the window. Funny how that worked out. You have the letter. No, it disappeared, along with Emmett's mining journal, his maps, and anything else that might prove what he knew. Gideon set down his coffee cup. But you think the evidence is still in the mine, hidden. I know it is. Emmett was careful. He wouldn't have kept everything in one place. She looked at Gideon with something that might have been hope if hope hadn't been beaten down so many times. Question is, can we find it before Cyrus finds us? We? Gideon raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Brennan, you're 7 months pregnant. You can't go crawling around a mine. Watch me. I'm serious, and so am I. Clara crossed to a trunk by the bed, opened it, pulled out a leather journal. Handwriting covered every page, numbers, dates, sketches of mine shaft layouts. This is my journal. Started it the day after Emmett died. Every conversation with Cyrus, every threat, every time one of his men rode past my property a little too slow, every offer to buy my land for half what it's worth. She held it up. This is proof that Cyrus wants me gone. It's not proof of murder, not yet. But if I can find what Emmett hid, if I can connect the bad timber to the mine collapse, then we have him. Gideon stood, walked to the window, looked out at the mountains where 3 men had died and a 4th might soon follow. You know what you're asking? I'm asking you to help me prove my husband was murdered, and that the man wearing a badge in Devil's Creek is the one who did it. If we're right and Cyrus finds out we're investigating, then he'll kill us both, I know. Clara's voice didn't waver. But here's the thing, Mr. Rivers. I'm already dead. The moment that baby is born, Cyrus will find a way to take this land. A woman alone with a child can't defend 50 acres, can't work it, can't survive out here. So either I fight now while I still can, or I wait for Cyrus to finish what he started. She placed one hand on her belly. The baby kicked. Gideon saw the movement through her dress. And I'll be damned if my child grows up thinking his mother was too scared to stand up for his father. Gideon looked at this woman, this widow, this mother-to-be, this stranger who was asking him to step into a war he hadn't started. He thought about the letter from Emmett, thought about the last words, if something happens to me, Someone needs to protect Clara. She's stronger than she knows, but strength doesn't stop bullets. He thought about Texas, about the woman he hadn't saved, about the promise he'd made to himself that he'd never stand aside again while good people got buried in bad ground. All right, he said, we'll find the evidence. But we do this smart. No rushing in, no getting yourself killed before you've had a chance to prove anything. Agreed. And Mrs. Brennan, when this is over, when we've taken down Cyrus and everything he's built, you're going to walk away from this alive. That's not a request, that's the deal. Clara extended her hand. Gideon shook it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. One more thing, she said. Stop calling me Mrs. Brennan. My name is Clara. They started that night. Not at the mine, too dangerous, too obvious. Instead, Clara led Gideon to a place he hadn't expected, the Devil's Creek Cemetery. Emmett's buried here, she said, carrying a lantern through rows of wooden markers. But so is someone else. Someone Cyrus thought nobody cared about. She stopped at a grave near the back fence. The marker was simple pine, already weathering gray. The name carved into it read, William Sutton, died June 1885. William was a miner, Claire explained. Worked with Emmett, good man, quiet, kept to himself. One day he stopped showing up for shifts. Cyrus said he'd run off debts, woman trouble the usual. But Emmett didn't believe it, started asking questions. And then William turned up dead in the river. Drowned, they said. You think Cyrus killed him? I think William found out about the timber before Emmett did, and I think he's buried with evidence. Gideon stared at her. You want to dig up a grave? I want to see if what Emmett suspected is true. He told me William always kept a journal. Small leather book fit in a coat pocket. If it was important enough, William would have hidden it somewhere safe. She looked at the grave. Somewhere even Cyrus wouldn't look. It took them an hour to dig down to the coffin. Clara insisted on helping, despite Gideon's protest, shoveling dirt with a determination that would have been admirable if it wasn't so damn dangerous for a pregnant woman. When they pried open the coffin lid, William Sutton looked more or less like you'd expect after 3 months in Montana soil, which is to say not good. But tucked inside his coat, wrapped in oilcloth to keep the moisture out, was exactly what Clara had hoped for. A journal, small, leather-bound, filled with neat handwriting that documented 3 months of mine work. And on the last page, dated 2 days before William Sutton drowned Cyrus buying pine at $2 per beam from Wilson Lumber in Helena, selling to mine company at $8 per beam, claiming it's oak. Told supervisor timber's been treated, it hasn't. Beams are rotting from the inside, told Emmett and Samuel. We're going to the marshal. Cyrus can't know. Clara read it twice. Then she closed the journal and looked at Gideon with eyes that had gone hard as creekstone. We have him. We have part of it. We still need to prove the timber caused the collapse, and we need to connect it to the 3 men who died. Then we go to the mine. Tonight. Clara. Tonight, Gideon, before Cyrus figures out we're looking, before someone else gets hurt. She was right, Gideon knew it. But knowing something and liking it are different animals. They filled in the grave, replaced the dirt, said a silent apology to William Sutton for disturbing his rest. Then they headed east toward Copper Canyon Mine, where 3 men had died and the truth was buried deeper than any grave. The mine entrance looked like a wound in the mountain, a black mouth framed by timber that creaked in the wind. A chain across the opening that carried a sign closed by order of Sheriff Hartley. Gideon picked the lock. They slipped inside. The darkness swallowed them whole. Even with lanterns, they could only see 10 feet ahead. The air smelled like wet stone and old blood and something else. Something sweet and rotten that Gideon had smelled before in places where men died badly. Emmett said the evidence was in shaft 7, Clara whispered. Her voice echoed strange in the enclosed space. The shaft that collapsed. They followed a map Clara had drawn from memory, left at the first junction, straight through the main tunnel that ended in a slope that dropped 20 degrees and made Gideon's bad knees scream. The shaft timbers pressed in close on both sides. Some looked solid, others. Gideon stopped, pressed his hand against a support beam. The wood gave under his palm, soft, rotting from the inside just like William's journal said. God damn, he muttered. What? These beams, they're pine, cheap pine, look. He pulled a piece of wood free. It came apart like wet paper. This wouldn't support a cow, let alone a mine shaft. Clara touched another beam. It crumbled under her fingers. He killed them. Cyrus killed them with bad timber. We need photographs, samples, something a jury can... A sound stopped him cold. Footsteps. Behind them. Coming fast. Gideon killed his lantern, grabbed Clara's arm, pulled her into a side tunnel. They pressed against the rock, barely breathing. 3 men passed the junction, lanterns bobbing, voices low. Told us to check the whole damn mine. Said someone might have been snooping. Waste of time. Nobody's stupid enough to come down here at night. Cyrus doesn't pay us to think. He pays us to look. So we look. They moved on, footsteps fading into distance. Clara's hand found Gideon's in the dark. Squeezed once. He could feel her shaking, not from fear but from fury barely held in check. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "They'll circle back. Find us. Then we find what we came for, fast." They moved deeper into Shaft 7. The collapsed section had been partially cleared, but debris still blocked most of the tunnel. Clara climbed over fallen timber, moving with a determination that would have impressed Gideon if it wasn't so reckless. There, she pointed to a recess in the wall, partially hidden by a fallen beam. Emmett always hid important things in rock crevices. Said wood rots, but stone remembers. Gideon pulled the beam aside carefully because everything in this shaft was ready to fall. In the crevice, wrapped in the same oilcloth as William's journal, was a metal box. Inside, photographs of timber deliveries. Invoices showing Cyrus buying from Wilson Lumber at $2 per beam. Receipts showing him selling to the mine company at $8 with a supervisor's signature certifying the timber as grade A oak treated and inspected. And a letter, written in Emmett's hand, addressed to the U.S. Marshal in Denver. Clara read it by lantern light, lips moving soundlessly. When she finished, tears had cut tracks through the mine dust on her face. "He knew," she said. "He knew Cyrus would kill him. He wrote this anyway. Should go, now, before..." The explosion came without warning. Not dynamite, not a collapse, just the sudden terrible sound of wood giving way, followed by the roar of thousands of pounds of rock, deciding gravity was more important than hope. The tunnel entrance, their way out, disappeared under a wall of stone and timber. They were trapped. Gideon's ears rang. Dust filled his lungs, thick as water. He couldn't see Clara, couldn't hear anything except the aftermath of destruction. "Clara," he coughed, spat blood-tinged saliva. "Clara, answer me." "Here." Her voice came from his left, weak, shaking. I'm okay. The baby's okay." Gideon found her in the dark. She was sitting against the wall, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the metal box like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. "Can you walk?" "I think so." He helped her up, checked for injuries, scratches, bruises, nothing broken. Miracle, but miracles don't get you out of collapsed mine shafts. Gideon assessed their situation with the cold clarity of someone who'd been in bad spots before. The main entrance was gone, completely buried. Maybe they could dig out given a week and proper equipment. They had neither. "Is there another way out?" he asked. Clara thought. Emmett mentioned ventilation shafts, small openings to the surface, but I don't know where. "We'll find one, we have to." They moved through the darkness, conserving lantern oil, feeling their way along walls that wept moisture and whispered warnings. Every few yards, Gideon would stop, listen for the sound of moving air, the telltale sign of a connection to the outside. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time does strange things underground when you're running out of options. Then Clara gasped, not from pain, from recognition. "I know where we are. This is Shaft 4. Emmett brought me here once before they opened it for mining. There's a vertical shaft used to be a natural cave. Goes straight up, opens on the north side of the mountain." "How far?" 40 feet, maybe 50. 50 feet, straight up, with a pregnant woman. Gideon looked at her, really looked. Saw the exhaustion, the fear, the absolute refusal to give up. "Can you climb?" Clara touched her belly. The baby kicked in response. "I don't have a choice." The vertical shaft was exactly as bad as Gideon expected. A narrow chimney of rock, slick with moisture, barely wide enough for one person. Handholds scarce. Footholds worse. He went first, testing each grip, making sure the route was possible. 20 feet up, he found a ledge wide enough to rest. Called down to Clara. Your turn. Take it slow. If you need to stop, stop. Don't push too hard. She started climbing. Gideon could hear her breathing, labored, pained, but steady. Every few feet, she'd pause, one hand pressed to her belly, reassuring the child inside that everything was fine. They'd be fine just a little longer. 30 feet, 35. At 40 feet, Clara's foot slipped. She fell backward, fingers scrabbling at wet rock, nothing to catch herself on. Gideon lunged down, caught her wrist with both hands. The impact nearly tore his shoulder from its socket, but he held on. They hung there, Gideon braced against the shaft wall, Clara dangling over a 40-foot drop into darkness, and the metal box still somehow clutched in her free hand. Let go of the box, Gideon grunted. No, Sue. Clara, this is the only evidence. If I drop it, Emmett died for nothing. If you fall, you both die for nothing. Their eyes met in the dim light of the lantern she'd tied to her belt, and Gideon saw it the same thing he'd seen in his own mirror for 4 years. The look of someone who'd already lost everything that mattered, so dying, held less terror than failing. Pull me up, she said. I won't let go. So he did, inch by inch, muscle screaming, shoulder threatening to dislocate. He pulled her up until she could get a handhold, then a foothold, then leverage enough to climb again. 10 more feet. The last 10 feet took 20 minutes. When they finally emerged from the shaft, collapsing onto pine needles and solid ground under open sky, neither spoke for a long time. Just lay there breathing Montana air, feeling sunlight on skin, alive. Clara clutched the metal box to her chest. She hadn't let go. They made it back to Clara's cabin near dawn. Gideon half expected Cyrus's men to be waiting. But the farm was empty, silent except for the creek and the wind through cottonwood trees. Inside, Clara made coffee with hands that shook so badly she spilled half the grounds. Gideon didn't offer to help. Some things a person needs to do themselves to prove they still can. They sat at the table. Between them, the metal box. The evidence. The thing they'd nearly died for. What now? Clara asked. Now we take this to someone who can do something with it. A federal marshal. Maybe a territorial judge. That'll take weeks, and the moment we start making noise, Cyrus will know. He'll come for us. Then we don't make noise. We move quiet. Get the evidence to the right people, then disappear until... I can't disappear. Clara placed both hands on her belly. I'm 7 months pregnant. In 2 months, this baby comes whether I'm ready or not. And I am not giving birth while running from Cyrus Hartley. She was right. Gideon knew it. But right doesn't stop bullets. There might be another way, he said slowly, an idea forming. The territorial circuit judge, Nathaniel Carson. He's in Helena right now, but he'll be in Deer Lodge next month for the fall session. 3 days' ride from here. You think he'd listen? If we bring enough evidence. Yes, Carson's got a reputation, honest, doesn't take bribes, the kind of judge who actually believes in law instead of just using that. And what happens between now and next month, Iris isn't going to stop coming after this land. After me. Gideon thought about it. Thought about the mine, the timber, the 3 dead men, and the widow who refused to accept their deaths as accidents. Then we give Cyrus what he wants. Or make him think we're going, you know. Clara frowned. I don't understand. You tell Cyrus you'll sell. Set a date for the transaction, say 4 weeks from now. That buys us time. He thinks he's won, so he backs off. Meanwhile, we get this evidence to Judge Carson. When the judge comes through Devil's Creek on a circuit, probably early November, we have the law on our side before Cyrus realizes what's happening. You want me to lie to him? I want you to survive long enough to see justice done. The truth can wait 4 weeks. Clara stared at the metal box, at the photographs and invoices and her dead husband's final letter. Then she looked at Gideon with eyes that had gone hard and bright and absolutely certain. All right, we'll play it your way. But Gideon, yeah, when Judge Carson comes to Devil's Creek, I'm not hiding. I'm not sending you to speak for me. I'm standing in front of that man and telling him exactly what Cyrus Hartley did to my husband, to Samuel Cole, to Thomas Wright, and I'm watching Cyrus's face when he realizes a pregnant widow just destroyed everything he built. Gideon smiled, couldn't help it. Yes, ma'am. The next morning, Clara rode into Devil's Creek, alone. Gideon had offered to go with her, but she'd refused. This needs to be me, she said. Cyrus needs to see a woman who's given up, who's beaten. If you're standing next to me, he won't believe it. So Gideon watched from across the street as Clara Brennan walked into the sheriff's office, shoulders slumped, head down every inch, the defeated widow. She was inside for 20 minutes. When she came out, Cyrus was smiling. That night, Clara told Gideon what was said. He agreed to everything. 4 weeks, $5,000 for the land, which is half what it's worth, but he thinks I don't know that. We'll sign papers on November 1st. She paused. He also said something strange. What? He said he was sorry about Emmett, that good men die in mines, and it's a tragedy, but that's the cost of progress. And then he said, her voice dropped cold and flat. Your husband was a good man, Clara. Shame he didn't know when to keep his mouth shut. Gideon went very still. He admitted it, not in words that would hold up in court, but yes, he admitted it. They sat in silence. Outside night had fallen complete. No moon, just stars scattered across Montana sky like broken glass. November 1st, Gideon said. That's when Judge Carson arrives in Devil's Creek. I checked the circuit schedule. He'll be here to oversee local disputes property transfers. Perfect timing. Perfect for us. Hell for Cyrus. You scared, Clara thought about it, honest. Terrified. But I'm more angry than scared. And anger's a better fuel than fear. Gideon raised his coffee cup. To anger, then, and to 3 good men who deserve better. Clara touched her cup to his. The ceramic made a soft sound in the quiet cabin. To Emmett, she said, and to making damn sure he didn't die for nothing. Outside, the creek ran cold and fast toward the mountains where morning would come eventual, where November waited with the promise of justice or graves depending on which way the wind blew. And in the sheriff's office in Devil's Creek, Cyrus Hartley poured himself whiskey and smiled at a map of 50 acres that would soon be his thinking about timber and money and all the ways a man builds an empire in the West. He didn't know that empires fall, but he was about to learn. 4 weeks is a long time when you're pretending not to know someone wants you dead. Clara kept to her routine. Up before dawn to feed the chickens. Mend the fence line where winter wind had started testing the posts. Bake bread every Tuesday because that's what Emmett liked, and stopping now felt like admitting he was really gone. She smiled when people asked about the baby, said she was managing fine. Let them believe the lie. At night, when the cabin was dark and the only sound was wind through cottonwood trees, she pulled out the metal box, studied the invoices, memorized every detail of Emmett's letter until she could recite it word perfect. Evidence isn't enough, she'd learn. You have to know it, own it, be able to stand in front of a judge and speak truth without hesitation, without fear, without the shadow of doubt. Gideon came by the farm every few days, never stayed long, always had a reason, checking on livestock, delivering supplies from town, making sure the well pump hadn't frozen. Nobody questioned it. A deputy looking after a widow was expected. Proper even. What they did behind closed doors was different. Maps spread across Clara's kitchen table. Routes to Deer Lodge marked in pencil. Contingency plans if Cyrus discovered what they were doing. A carefully written testimony for Judge Carson, sealed in wax, hidden in Clara's root cellar beneath a false floorboard Gideon had installed. If something happens to me, Clara said one night, watching Gideon conceal the testimony, you get that to the judge. Promise me. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me anyway. Gideon looked at her, really looked. Saw a woman 7 months pregnant living alone preparing for war. Saw the rifle she kept loaded by the door. The way she checked the windows before sitting down. The careful way she moved, always aware of exits, always planning the next move. She'd learned to survive. But survival was making her hard. I promise, he said. But Clara, when this is over, when Cyrus is in chains and the land is safe, you're going to have to learn how to live again. Not just survive. Live. One problem at a time, Gideon. Fair enough. The first hint of trouble came on a Tuesday. Clara was at the general store buying flour and coffee when she noticed the silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a small-town store. The wrong kind of silence. The kind that means people were just talking about you. Mavis Thornton, who ran the store with her husband, Jeremiah, wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. Just added up the purchases with fingers that fumbled the abacus beads. That'll be $2.40, Clara paid. Started to leave. Mrs. Brennan, Mavis's voice was barely a whisper. Be careful, Cyrus was in here this morning asking questions about who you've been talking to, who's been visiting your farm. Clara's blood went cold. What did you tell him? The truth, that Deputy Rivers stops by sometimes, that you keep to yourself mostly. Mavis glanced toward the back room where her husband was unpacking crates. But Cyrus, he's suspicious. Said it doesn't sit right you agreeing to sell so easy. Said a woman who fought him for 6 weeks doesn't just give up. What should I have done? Kept fighting? I'm pregnant, Mavis. Alone. I can't. I know, I'm just saying, be careful. Clara left the store with her supplies and a sick feeling in her gut. Cyrus was getting nervous. Nervous men did stupid things, or smart things depending on which side of the bullet you were standing. She headed home, taking the long way through the aspens where the trail was narrow and she could see anyone following. Nobody did, but the feeling of eyes on her back didn't fade. At the farm, she found Gideon waiting on the porch. His face told her everything. He knows, Gideon said. Maybe not exactly what we're doing, but he knows something's wrong. How do you know? Because he just offered me a promotion. Assistant sheriff. $50 a month. All I fuss to do is keep an eye on things and make sure the peace stays kept. Gideon spat into the dirt. Translation looked the other way when his men come calling. Clara sat down on the porch step. The baby kicked hard like it was angry about something. She pressed her hand to her belly, trying to calm the life inside her, while her own heart hammered against her ribs. What did you tell him? That I'd think about it. Bought us maybe 2 days before he gets suspicious. Gideon sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Clara, we might need to move up the timeline. Get you out of here sooner. No, we stick to the plan. Judge Carson arrives November 1st. That's 3 weeks. We can make it 3 weeks. And if Cyrus comes for you before then? Clara looked at the land Emmett had died for. 50 acres that would have been their son's inheritance. That would have been freedom. Then we fight. 2 nights later they came. Clara woke to the sound of horses. Too many horses. She grabbed the rifle, moved to the window, peered through a gap in the curtains. 6 men. Torches. Cyrus wasn't with them, but she recognized his lieutenant, a man named Pike, who had a reputation for doing things Cyrus didn't want directly connected to his name. Mrs. Brennan, Pike's voice carried across the yard, we're here on behalf of Sheriff Hartley. Need to have a conversation about your land sale. Open up! Clara's hands tightened on the rifle. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might wake the baby. She considered her options. All of them bad. If she opened the door, they'd find a reason to search the house, find the evidence, kill her and call it self-defense. If she refused, they'd force their way in. Same result, messier. If she fired on them, she was a murderer. They were the law, except they weren't. Not really. They were just men with badges serving a man who'd killed her husband. She made her decision. Clara went to the back window, the one that opened onto the creek side. Climbed through awkward with the pregnancy, but she'd practiced this exact move a dozen times. Dropped to the ground, stumbled, caught herself. The rifle caught on the window frame. She had to leave it. She ran, not toward town, not toward help. Toward the one place she'd agreed to meet Gideon if everything went to hell, the old line shack 2 miles north where prospectors used to shelter before the mine played out. Behind her, she heard the crash of her front door being kicked in, heard Pike shouting, heard horses being spurred into pursuit. Clara ran through darkness, one hand on her belly, the other grabbing at tree branches to keep her balance. The baby kicked and kicked, protesting the jostling. She whispered apologies between gasping breaths, promised it would be okay. Everything would be okay just a little farther. A lie, but the kind of lie mothers tell. The line shack appeared like a miracle, low roof, half-collapsed wall, but solid enough. Clara stumbled inside, collapsed against the far wall, trying to quiet her breathing. Hoofbeats, getting closer. The door opened. Clara's hand went to her boot where she'd hidden a small knife. Not much against 6 men, but better than nothing. It's me, Gideon. Thank God. He crossed to her, knelt down, checked her for injuries. You hurt? No, just tired. The baby's... She winced as another hard kick landed against her ribs. Not happy. Pike and his men are searching the creek. We have maybe 10 minutes before they think to check here. Gideon pulled her to her feet. There's a horse outside. We need to go. Now. Somewhere Cyrus won't think to look. Somewhere we can wait out the 3 weeks until Judge Carson arrives. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to go back to her farm to the land Emmett died protecting. But she'd learned something in 6 weeks of widowhood pride is expensive, and she couldn't afford the cost. All right, let's go. They rode north through country that got rougher with every mile. The horse Gideon's buckskin mare handled the terrain better than Clara handled the saddle. She sat in front of Gideon, his arms around her, keeping her steady as the mare picked her way between rocks and deadfall. Where are we going? She asked after an hour of silence. Man named Tobias Fletcher lives about 8 miles from Devil's Creek. Used to be a U.S. Marshal long time ago. Retired out here, built himself a cabin in the middle of nowhere. And you think he'll help us? I think he's the only person in 100 miles who isn't afraid of Cyrus Hartley. The cabin appeared just before dawn, solid logs, good roof, situated in a clearing with clear sight lines in every direction. A defensive position, the kind of place a man picks when he's expecting trouble. An old man stood on the porch, rifle in his hands, white hair pulled back in a tail that hung to his shoulders. One eye milky with cataract, the other sharp as broken glass. That's close enough, he said. Gideon reined in the mare. Mr. Fletcher, it's Gideon Rivers. We met last month at, I remember, deputy working for Cyrus Hartley. The rifle didn't lower. Question is, what's a deputy doing showing up at my door before sunrise with a pregnant woman on his horse? Question should be, what's a deputy doing running from Cyrus Hartley because he's trying to protect a widow from getting murdered? Fletcher's good eye narrowed, studied Gideon, then Clara, then the exhaustion on both their faces. You two look like you've had a long night. 3 weeks worth of long night all at once. Fletcher lowered the rifle. Well, hell, come inside, coffee's on. And I got questions that need answering before I decide whether to help you or shoot you for bringing trouble to my door. Inside, the cabin smelled like coffee and gun oil, and something else, a life lived alone so long that even the air had learned to keep quiet. Fletcher poured 3 cups, set them on a table made from a single plank of pine, older than any of them. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, using the warmth to stop the shaking. She hadn't realized how cold she was until now. How scared. Start talking, Fletcher said. So they did. Clara told about Emmett, about the mine, about the letter and the evidence and Cyrus's threats. Gideon filled in the parts she'd missed: the grave robbery, the near collapse in the mine shaft, the plan to bring everything to Judge Carson on November 1st. Fletcher listened without interruption. When they finished, he sat back, took a long sip of coffee, and stared at them with his one good eye. You two have any idea how many ways this can go wrong? More than we'd like, Gideon said. Cyrus has 8 men on his payroll, good men with guns. You have, Fletcher gestured at them, a pregnant woman and a deputy he probably already fired in absentia. And you think you can hold out 3 weeks until some judge shows up and magically fixes everything? You have a better idea, Clara asked. Fletcher looked at her, really looked. Saw something there that made him nod just a fraction. No, but I have a defensible position, enough ammunition to hold off a small army, in 40 years of experience dealing with men like Cyrus Hartley. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the clearing. You can stay here, both of you, until the judge arrives. But I need to know, are you willing to fight for this? Because if Cyrus figures out where you are, he will come. And when he does, it won't be 6 men with torches. It'll be everything he has. Clara touched her belly. The baby had finally stopped kicking. Settled, like it was waiting to hear her answer. My husband died trying to do the right thing. 3 good men died, and their widows, Sarah Cole, Martha Wright, they're raising children alone because Cyrus Hartley wanted to save $1,200 on timber. She looked Fletcher in the eye. So yes, I'm willing to fight, whatever it takes. Fletcher smiled, not happy, just recognition. You remind me of someone I knew once, woman who stood up to a corrupt sheriff back in Arizona Territory by 1877. She won too. Of course, she had to shoot him first, but she won. He extended his hand to Clara. Welcome to my home, Mrs. Brennan, for however long you need it. The first week was almost peaceful. Fletcher's cabin had 2 rooms, the main living area, and a smaller bedroom that he insisted Clara take. He slept on a bedroll by the fireplace. Gideon took the porch keeping watch through the nights, rifle across his knees. During the days they prepared, Fletcher showed them his defenses. A root cellar beneath the cabin dug deep enough to shelter in if things went bad. A well inside the cabin itself, luxury in frontier Montana, but Fletcher had learned from experience. Can't siege someone who has water. He also had weapons, a lot of weapons. 40 years as a marshal, he explained, showing them a cache of rifles, pistols, and ammunition that would have stocked a small armory. You make enemies. Those enemies sometimes come calling after you retire. I like to be ready. Gideon cleaned and loaded every weapon. Showed Clara how to fire the Winchester, how to reload without looking, how to aim for center mass because in a fight you don't have time for fancy shooting. Clara learned fast, faster than Gideon expected. Her hands were steady despite the pregnancy, her eyes cold when she sighted down the barrel. Emmett taught me to shoot rabbits for dinner, she said. Figure men aren't much different. Bigger targets, actually. Fletcher laughed at that. First genuine laugh Gideon had heard from the old man. At night, they took turns on watch. Gideon and Fletcher mostly, but Clara insisted on taking the midnight shift. Said she couldn't sleep anyway. The baby kept her awake, kicking and rolling like it was preparing for something. During those quiet hours, Clara would sit on the porch with the rifle and think about Emmett, about the life they'd planned, the ranch they were going to build, the children, plural, they'd hoped who would grow up free in Montana territory. All of it gone now, burned up in a mine shaft because Cyrus Hartley wanted money more than he valued lives. She touched her belly, whispered to the child inside, "Your father was a good man. I need you to know that. Whatever happens, whatever you hear later, he was good, and he died trying to protect us." A pause. "I won't let that be for nothing." The baby kicked. Once. Hard. Like it understood. On the 8th day, Owen Sutherland rode in. Gideon saw him coming from a mile away, lone rider, no weapons visible, hands up in a gesture of peace. He recognized the man, young cowboy, worked at the ranch south of town. Brother had been shot by one of Cyrus's men 2 years back. "Hold your fire," Gideon called to Fletcher. "I know him." Owen reined in at the clearing's edge, looked at the cabin, at the rifles pointed at him, at the situation he'd ridden into. "I'm not here to fight," he said. His voice had the careful flatness of someone delivering bad news. "I'm here to warn you. Cyrus knows where you are." Clara stepped onto the porch. "How tracker named Boone, best in the territory. Cyrus hired him 3 days ago. Boone found your trail from the line shack. Followed it here." Owen shifted in his saddle. "Cyrus is gathering men. He'll be here tomorrow, maybe the next day, and he's not coming to talk." "How many men?" Fletcher asked. 12, maybe more. He's paying double rates." Word spread. Gun hands are riding in from as far as Helena. 12 men, against 3, well, 2.5 if you counted Clara's condition. "Why are you telling us this?" Gideon asked. "You work in this territory. Cyrus finds out you warned us, you're done." Owen's jaw tightened. "My brother's name was Thomas. Thomas Sutherland. Cyrus's man shot him outside the saloon. Said Thomas was drunk, causing trouble. He wasn't. He was just standing there." Owen looked at Clara. "I heard what your husband was trying to do. Heard about the evidence. If there's a chance, any chance of bringing a serious birth down, I want to help." Fletcher and Gideon exchanged glances. Unspoken question. "Trust him." Clara made the decision for them. "Get off your horse, Owen. Come inside. If you're willing to stand with us, we'll take all the help we can get." They spent the next day fortifying. Owen proved useful. Strong back good with his hands, and most importantly, local knowledge. He knew the terrain around Fletcher's cabin. Knew which approaches Cyrus would likely use. Knew how men fought in Montana territory when things got ugly. Together, they dug trenches. Set up barriers using felled trees. Created choke points where horses couldn't maneuver. Fletcher showed them an old cavalry trick, string wire between trees at chest height. Rider doesn't see it until it's too late. Clotheslines a man right off his horse. Gideon worked alongside them, but his mind was elsewhere. Doing math. 12 men, maybe more. Rifles, pistols, probably dynamite if Cyrus was serious. Against 4 defenders, one of whom was a pregnant woman. The numbers didn't work. That night he found Clara in the bedroom, packing a bag. Small items, a change of clothes. The metal box with Emmett's evidence. "What are you doing?" "Getting ready." "For what?" Clara looked at him. Her face was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes after you've made a hard decision and there's no going back. Tomorrow when Cyrus comes, you're going to put me on a horse and send me north, toward Deer Lodge. I'll ride as far as I can find Judge Carson, give him the evidence. Clara, listen to me. The three of you can hold this cabin, maybe, for a while, but you can't hold it forever. And if we all die here, Cyrus wins. The evidence disappears. Emmett's death means nothing. She placed a hand on her belly. But if I get away, if I reach the judge, then everything we've done matters. You're 7 months pregnant. You can't ride 3 days to Deer Lodge. Watch me. Gideon wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, too reckless, that Emmett wouldn't have wanted her risking the baby. But he looked at her face and saw the same thing he'd seen that first day on her porch. Determination, pure and absolute. There might be another way, he said slowly. Owen mentioned a telegraph line, runs through Canyon Springs about 15 miles west. If we could get a message to Judge Carson to tell him what's happening. He'd come early, bring federal marshals. Clara's eyes lit up. Gideon, that's dangerous as hell and probably stupid, but maybe less stupid than you riding 3 days pregnant. He sat down beside her on the bed. Owen could go, tonight, before Cyrus gets here. He knows the country, could make it to Canyon Springs in 3 hours on a fast horse. And say what, please come quickly, the sheriff is trying to murder us. Something like that, but with legal language. Judge Carson is bound by territorial law. If there's credible evidence of corruption and murder, he has to investigate. Has to come. Clara thought about it, weighed the risks, finally nodded. All right, we try it. But if Owen doesn't come back, if something happens, I'm riding to Deer Lodge. No arguments. Deal. They told Fletcher and Owen the plan. Fletcher thought it was insane, but admitted they didn't have better options. Owen agreed to go immediately. I'll be back, he said, mounting up. With help or without. Either way, I'll be back. He rode west into darkness. 3 of them remained. Cyrus came at dawn. Not 12 men, 15, maybe 20. Hard to count them through the fog that had rolled down from the mountains during the night. Fletcher saw them first. Rang the cabin's warning bell, an old ship's bell he'd salvaged from God knows where. The sound cut through morning air like a knife. Gideon grabbed his rifle. Clara took position at the window, Winchester loaded. Fletcher climbed to the loft where he had the best vantage. The riders stopped at the clearing's edge, just out of rifle range. Smart. Cyrus rode forward alone, hands visible, no weapons drawn, playing it civilized. Mrs. Brennan, his voice carried across the open ground. I know you're in there. I know you have something that belongs to me. Papers, evidence you stole from the mine. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. Fletcher put a hand on her shoulder. Not yet. Here's how this works, Cyrus continued. You give me those papers, all of them, and I let you walk away. You the deputy, the old man, you all walk. Leave Montana. Never come back. I'll even give you money for the travel. He's lying, Fletcher muttered. I know, Clara said. Or, Cyrus's voice hardened. You refuse and my men come in. We burn that cabin, and whatever we find in the ashes, he paused. Well, accidents happen in fires, even to pregnant women. Clara stood, pushed the window open, shouted back. My husband was a good man, Cyrus. He died because you cared more about money than safety, and you think I'm going to let you walk away from that. Silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. Then Cyrus smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. He raised his hand, dropped it. 20 men spurred their horses forward. Here we go, Fletcher said, and fired the first shot. The battle for Fletcher's cabin had raged for nearly 3 hours when everything changed. The first wave came hard and fast, riders trying to close the distance before the defenders could reload. Fletcher dropped 3 men before they made it halfway across the clearing. Gideon got 2 more. Clara fired once, saw a man fall from his horse, saw blood, felt nothing. The riders broke, regrouped. Second wave came from the east, trying to flank. The wire between the trees did its job. 2 men clotheslined from their saddles horses, screaming confusion spreading through the attackers' ranks. Third wave brought torches. They're going to burn us out, Gideon shouted, firing at a man carrying burning pitch. Fletcher calmly loaded, aimed, fired. The torchbearer dropped. Another man picked up the torch. Fletcher shot him too. But there were too many. Torches landed on the roof, on the porch. Smoke started to curl up from the dry wood. Clara, crouched near the window, heard something that cut through the chaos. A sound different from gunfire. Clear and unmistakable. A bugle. The cavalry call that every frontiersman recognized. Federal marshals. "Listen," she shouted. Through the gun smoke and fog, riders appeared, coming fast from the west. At least a dozen. The lead rider wore a black coat, silver badge glinting in the morning sun. Judge Nathaniel Carson had arrived early. Owen had made it to the telegraph, had gotten the message through, had brought help. "Root cellar," Fletcher ordered, seeing the roof about to collapse. "Now," Gideon grabbed Clara, pushed her toward the trapdoor. She resisted. "I can still fight. The baby can't." He shoved her through the opening, followed her down. Fletcher came last, dropping the trapdoor just as the ceiling above caught fire. In the darkness of the root cellar, they could hear everything. Boots on the floor above, men shouting, the crackle of flames, and Judge Carson's voice loud and clear. "Cyrus Hartley, you are under arrest for murder, corruption, and conspiracy. Surrender your weapons." Gunshots, shouting, the sound of justice arriving and loaded for bear. Clara's water broke. She felt it, warm liquid soaking through her dress. Felt the first contraction hit like a fist in her gut. "No," she whispered. "Not now, please, not now." But babies don't care about timing. Gideon heard her gasp, saw her doubled over in the dim light filtering through cracks in the trapdoor. "Clara, the baby, it's coming." Above them, Cyrus's voice, "You can't do this, I'm the sheriff." Fletcher's face was grim in the half-light. "There's a tunnel. Dug it myself, case I ever needed to escape. Goes out past the clearing. 100 yards. Opens behind the rocks." "Can she make it?" Gideon asked. Another contraction. Clara bit down on her hand to keep from screaming. "Do I have a choice?" They had to crawl, single file through a tunnel barely wide enough for a man, let alone a woman in labor. Clara went first, Gideon behind her, Fletcher bringing up the rear. The tunnel was dark. Dirt. Roots hanging down that grabbed at hair and clothes. Clara crawled on hands and knees, belly dragging each movement, agony. Every few feet another contraction would hit, and she'd have to stop, pressing her forehead against cold earth, breathing through the pain. "Keep moving," Gideon urged. "Almost there." Behind them, the sound of the trapdoor being smashed open. Men yelling. They'd found the root cellar. "Faster," Fletcher hissed. Clara crawled faster, hands bleeding, knees screaming, the baby pressing down so hard she thought she might give birth right there in the tunnel, buried in Montana dirt with killers 10 feet behind. Then light. The tunnel exit. They emerged behind a rock outcrop hidden from the cabin by boulders and scrub pine. Smoke rose from where Fletcher's home was burning. In the clearing, federal marshals had Cyrus and his men surrounded. Clara saw this through eyes blurred with pain. Then another contraction hit, and the world narrowed to a single point of absolute agony. "The baby!" she gasped. "Gideon, the baby's coming now." Fletcher knelt beside Clara. "I've delivered 3 calves and a foal. Figure a baby can't be that different." It was possibly the least reassuring thing anyone had ever said, but Clara was past caring. She grabbed Fletcher's hands, squeezed until bones ground together, and pushed. In the clearing below, Judge Carson's voice rang out, "You have the right to remain silent." Gunshots, the last of Cyrus's men surrendering. Clara pushed again, felt something give, felt pressure and pain, and then a cry. High and thin and absolutely furious at being born in the dirt behind a rock with a battle raging 100 yards away. Fletcher held up a tiny, bloody, perfect human being. "It's a boy," he said, grinning like a fool. "A healthy boy." Gideon pulled off his coat, wrapped the baby, placed him in Clara's arms. She looked down at her son, Emmett's son, the child 3 men had died protecting before he was even born. "Patrick," she whispered. "Your name is Patrick Emmett Brennan." The baby stopped crying, opened eyes that were dark and deep and would someday be the exact shade of his father's. In the clearing, Cyrus Hartley was on his knees in the dirt, hands bound, screaming obscenities at Judge Carson, while federal marshals rounded up his men. The war was over. They'd won. Clara held her son against her chest and cried for Emmett, for the 3 dead men, for 6 weeks of fear and fighting, and a birth that should have happened in a bed with a midwife instead of dirt with an old marshal who'd delivered calves. But mostly she cried because it was done, and they'd survived. Judge Nathaniel Carson was not a large man. 60 years old, gray at the temples with hands that looked better suited to holding books than guns. But when he spoke, grown men listened. When he walked into a room, silence followed. He stood over Clara Brennan where she lay in the dirt behind the rocks holding a newborn, who was maybe 30 minutes old, still covered in birth blood and Montana dust. "Mrs. Brennan," he said quietly, "I'm Judge Carson. Owen Sutherland sent a telegraph. Said you had evidence regarding Sheriff Hartley and the deaths of 3 minors." Clara looked up at him, hair plastered to her face with sweat, dress torn, hands shaking, but her voice was steady. "I have evidence, and I have testimony, and I have 3 widows who can tell you exactly what Cyrus Hartley did to this town." She held her son closer. "But first, Your Honor, I need somewhere safe to deliver the afterbirth and make sure this baby doesn't die of exposure." Carson's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. "Marshal Porter," he called to one of the federal men, "get a wagon. Take Mrs. Brennan and the child to the doctor in Devil's Creek. Post 2 guards. Nobody goes near them unless I say so." "Yes, sir." Carson looked at Gideon and Fletcher, both still armed, both still looking like they'd fight if someone gave them a reason. "You two, with me. We're going to have a conversation about what the hell just happened here." The doctor in Devil's Creek was a thin man named Morris, who'd seen everything frontier medicine had to offer and was unimpressed by most of it. He examined Clara and the baby with practiced efficiency, grunting, occasionally making notes. "Baby's small but healthy, 7 pounds, maybe 8. Good lungs, I can hear that from here." Patrick was indeed screaming furious about being poked and prodded. "Mother's exhausted, malnourished, and has a minor tear that I've stitched. She needs rest food and no excitement for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Clara repeated. The trial can wait until you're strong enough to testify without collapsing. Judge Carson stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Mrs. Brennan, I've spent the last 3 hours interviewing witnesses. Your sister, the widows of Samuel Cole and Thomas Wright, half the town seems like. And I've examined the evidence your husband hid in that mine." He pulled up a chair, sat beside the bed, where Clara was nursing Patrick, trying to figure out how to get a baby to latch when nobody had taught her. "What I'm about to tell you stays in this room until I say otherwise." "Understood." Clara nodded. "Sheriff Hartley is going to prison. The evidence is overwhelming, but this case is bigger than timber fraud and 3 dead miners. I've been investigating Cyrus for 2 years. Territorial corruption, land theft, election fraud. What your husband found, what you risked your life to protect, that's the keystone. The piece that connects everything." Carson leaned forward. "I'm convening a territorial grand jury, public trial, testimony from you, from the other widows, from anyone Cyrus has hurt. I want Devil's Creek to see what justice looks like when it actually works." "When?" Clara asked. 2 weeks. Gives you time to recover. Gives me time to build an ironclad case." He stood. "Until then, you're under federal protection. Marshals will guard this building. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out. You're safe, Mrs. Brennan." For the first time in 6 weeks, Clara believed it. The trial began on November 15th, 1885. Devil's Creek didn't have a proper courthouse. Trials were usually held in the saloon with the judge sitting at the bar and witnesses standing wherever there was room. But Carson refused. "This is a federal case, we do it proper." So they built a temporary courthouse in the town square, benches for spectators, a proper witness stand, an American flag hanging behind the judge's bench, the real one, not some saloon decoration. 300 people showed up. Every resident of Devil's Creek, miners from surrounding camps, reporters from Helena and as far as Denver. This was news. Corruption trials always were, but one involving a sheriff, a pregnant widow, and 3 dead men had the kind of story that sold newspapers. Cyrus sat at the defendant's table in chains. His lawyers, 2 men from Helena, who specialized in defending the indefensible, flanked him. He looked smaller than Clara remembered. Older. The kind of aging that happens when a man realizes he's lost. Clara sat in the front row, Patrick in her arms. The baby was 2 weeks old, still tiny, still learning how to exist in a world that had almost killed him before he was born. Beside her, Gideon in his deputy uniform, though he'd resigned the position the day after Cyrus's arrest. On her other side, Fletcher looking uncomfortable in a suit someone had loaned him. Judge Carson called the court to order. The trial lasted 3 days. The first day was evidence. Carson methodically walked the jury through invoices, receipts, photographs, showed them the difference between good timber and rotten pine, brought in an engineer who explained exactly how bad supports cause mine collapses. The numbers were damning. Cyrus had pocketed $2,400 over 18 months. 3 men died because he wanted profit over safety. The second day was testimony. Sarah Cole went first. Samuel's widow, 28 years old with 3 children under 6. She told the jury about her husband's warnings, how Samuel had found the rotten timber, how he'd planned to report it. The night before Samuel died, he told me he was scared. Said Cyrus had found out they were asking questions. Said he might not come home. Her voice broke. I told him to stop, to let it go, to think about the children. He said he was thinking about the children, that he couldn't let other men die working those shafts. Next came Martha Wright, Thomas's widow. She brought the photographs Thomas had taken of the timber deliveries, the ones Cyrus thought he'd destroyed. Turned out Thomas had made copies, given them to his sister for safekeeping. My husband documented everything, Martha said. He knew something was wrong, knew Cyrus would try to cover it up, so he made sure there was evidence, even if he didn't survive to present it himself. Then Clara took the stand. She'd prepared for this, rehearsed her testimony with Gideon a dozen times, knew every question Carson would ask, every objection Cyrus's lawyers would raise. But standing there looking out at the courtroom full of people who'd watched her crawl through dirt on Main Street 6 weeks ago, who'd seen her husband buried and said nothing, the prepared words disappeared. My name is Clara Brennan, she said. I'm 23 years old. 2 weeks ago, I gave birth to my son Patrick in the dirt behind a rock while federal marshals arrested the man who killed my husband. Cyrus's lawyer objected. Your Honor, the defendant hasn't been convicted of. Overruled, Carson said coldly. The witness may continue. Clara took a breath. Patrick squirmed in her arms. She adjusted him, found her center started again. Emmett Brennan was the best man I've ever known. He was honest, kind. He believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. She looked at the jury. 12 men, all minors or former minors, all of them knowing exactly what she was talking about. My husband died because Cyrus Hartley decided that $1,200 was worth more than 3 lives. Because safety costs money and greed doesn't care about the bond. She pulled out Emmett's letter, the one hidden in the mine. Read it aloud, every word, her voice never wavering. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Mrs. Brennan, Carson said gently, do you believe your husband's death was an accident? No, Your Honor. I believe he was murdered, not with a gun or a knife, but with rotten timber and deliberate negligence, which is still murder even if you don't pull a trigger. Cyrus's lawyer tried to discredit her, asked about her mental state after Emmett's death, suggested grief had made her irrational, implied she'd fabricated evidence to get revenge. Clara looked at the lawyer the way you'd look at something stuck to your boot. Counselor, I'm a widow raising a newborn alone on 50 acres of land your client tried to steal. I've been shot at, nearly burned alive, and gave birth in the wilderness during a gunfight. You think I'm irrational? She smiled. No warmth in it. I'm the most rational person in this courtroom. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know exactly what Cyrus Hartley is. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes, guilty on all counts. Carson sentenced Cyrus to 25 years in territorial prison, stripped him of his badge, his land holdings, his business interests. Everything he'd built in Devil's Creek, gone. As marshals led Cyrus out in chains, he looked at Clara one last time. You think you've won, he said, but you're still alone. Still a woman with a baby in Montana territory. How long you think you'll last? Clara stood, walked right up to him, close enough that the marshals tensed. I lasted through you, she said quietly. Everything else is easy. 4 weeks later, the first snow came early that year. By mid-December, Devil's Creek was buried under 3 feet of powder, and Montana territory had transformed into something from a painting, beautiful, deadly, unforgiving. Clara sat in what had been Cyrus's house. The territorial court had awarded it to her as partial restitution. 50 acres of farmland plus a house in town. More property than any single woman in Montana owned. She wasn't single anymore. The wedding had been quiet, practical. Judge Carson had performed the ceremony in his chambers before leaving Devil's Creek. Clara in a borrowed dress, Patrick in a basket at her feet, Gideon in the same suit he'd worn to the trial. No flowers, no music. No pretense that this was about romance. Do you, Clara Brennan, take Gideon Rivers as your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Do you, Gideon Rivers, take Clara Brennan as your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Then by the power vested in me by Montana territory, I pronounce you married. God have mercy on both your souls. They'd shaken hands after, like business partners signing a contract, because that's what it was, a contract. Gideon needed a place to stay after resigning as deputy. Clara needed help running the farm and protection against anyone who thought a widow was easy prey. They needed each other in the practical, survival-focused way frontier life demanded. Love, if it came, would come later. Now, a month after the wedding, Clara sat by the fireplace in her new house nursing Patrick, while Gideon read aloud from a newspaper. News from back east, politics she didn't care about, a world that seemed impossibly far from Montana's snow and wood smoke. There's a letter, Gideon said, setting down the paper. From Judge Carson. He wants you to testify in Helena. Grand jury investigation into territorial corruption. Says your testimony could help prosecute 3 more sheriffs and 2 territorial officials. Clara looked at Patrick, 2 months old now, starting to smile when he wasn't screaming, starting to look like Emmett around the eyes. Will you come with me? Of course. And the farm. Fletcher said he'd watch it. Man's bored in retirement anyway. Clara smiled at that. Fletcher had become a fixture in their lives, stopping by every few days ostensibly to check on the livestock, but really just to see the baby. The old marshal was lonely, Clara realized. 40 years of law enforcement had left him with skills everyone respected and a personal life consisting of an empty cabin and memories. Tell Carson yes, she said, but not until spring. I'm not taking a 2-month-old to Helena in winter. Gideon nodded, started to go back to his newspaper, then stopped. Clara, yes. You ever regret it? In marrying me instead of, I don't know, waiting, finding someone you actually loved? Clara considered the question. Honest, because if nothing else, their marriage was built on honesty. I loved Emmett, she said carefully. I'll always love Emmett. He was my first love, my first everything. And nobody replaces that. She adjusted Patrick, who'd fallen asleep mid-feeding. But Emmett's gone, and you're here, and what we have, this partnership, this friendship, this mutual respect that's real, that matters. But it's not love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Gideon, she looked at him, really looked. I trust you, with my life, with Patrick's life, with everything that matters. And in Montana Territory 1885, that's worth more than love. Gideon was quiet for a long time. Then Emmett was a lucky man. No, Emmett was a dead man. You're the lucky one. You get to live. It should have been cruel. It wasn't. Just truth stated plainly. Gideon went back to his newspaper. Clara went back to watching the fire. Outside, snow fell on Devil's Creek, covering everything in white, making the whole town look new. Fletcher died in March of 1886. Peaceful, in his sleep, the way old men hope to go, but rarely do. Gideon found him in the cabin, sitting in his chair by the window rifle across his lap, like he'd fallen asleep on watch and just never woke up. The funeral was small. Clara, Gideon, Owen Sutherland, a handful of miners who remembered Fletcher from the old days. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley where he could see the mountains he'd called home for 40 years. A week later, a lawyer from Helena arrived with Fletcher's will. The cabin and all its contents went to Gideon. The weapons, the land, everything. And a letter sealed with Gideon's name on it in Fletcher's careful handwriting. Gideon read it alone, sitting on Fletcher's porch. Gideon, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Good, I'm tired. You probably think I helped you and Clara because it was the right thing to do. That's half true. The other half is I saw myself in you, a man running from the past, a man who thought he could outride guilt if he just kept moving. I did that for 20 years after my wife died, rode from Texas to Montana to Arizona and back, looking for something, Redemption maybe, or just exhaustion. What I learned is you can't outrun the past, but you can build something new that makes the past matter less. You and Clara, you're building something. Maybe not the romance novels talk about, but something real, something that'll last. Keep building it, son. And when the time comes that you can't run anymore, don't. Stand still, let life catch up, see what happens. One more thing, that cabin's defensive position isn't an accident. I built it for war because I expected war. You want to know the truth? War never came. Just 40 years of waiting for something that never happened. Don't wait, Gideon. Live. Tobias Gideon folded the letter, put it in his pocket, sat on that porch until sunset thinking about running and standing still and what it meant to actually live instead of just survive. When he came home, Clara was at the stove making dinner with Patrick strapped to her chest in a sling she'd sewn. The baby was 4 months old now, fat and happy, starting to grab at things. "You all right?" she asked. "Fletcher left me the cabin." "I know," the lawyer told me. "And a letter." "What did it say?" Gideon pulled out the letter, handed it to her, watched her read it, saw her expression soften. "He was a good man," Clara said. "He was. And he was right about one thing I've been running, since Texas. Since the woman I couldn't save died, and I realized being a lawman didn't make me a good man." Clara set down her spoon, gave him her full attention. "I'm done running," Gideon said. "I'm staying here, in Devil's Creek, with you and Patrick. Not because it's convenient, not because it's practical, but because," he struggled to find the words, "because this is where I want to be." Is this a declaration of love, Gideon Rivers? Maybe, I don't know. I'm not good at this. Clara smiled. First genuine smile he'd seen from her since before Emmett died. She crossed the room, stood on her toes, kissed him. Not passionate, just soft, sweet. The kind of kiss that said, "I see you, I know you, and that's enough." "We'll figure it out," she said, "together." 18 months later, summer of 1887, the Brennan Rivers Ranch had grown. 50 acres wasn't enough for cattle, but it was perfect for horses. Gideon had a talent for breaking wild Mustangs, something he'd learned in Texas and forgotten until Clara asked if he'd try. Now they had 12 horses. Good stock, strong. People came from 3 counties to buy Rivers trained mounts. Clara ran the business side, invoices, sales negotiations. Turned out the skills she'd learned keeping her father's books translated perfectly to running a horse ranch. Patrick was 18 months old, walking, talking, mostly saying horse and dah, which pleased Gideon more than he wanted to admit. On a Tuesday in July, Clara told Gideon she was pregnant. They were in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when she just said it. Flat, matter of fact. "I'm pregnant again, about 3 months. Gideon's hand stilled on the mare's flank. "You're sure?" "I've done this before, I'm sure." He didn't know what to say. They'd shared a bed for over a year now. Had built something that looked like marriage, felt like partnership might be growing into love. "But a baby, are you happy about it?" he asked. Clara thought about it, honest like always. "I don't know. Patrick's father was Emmett. That made sense. This baby." She touched her stomach. "This baby is ours, yours and mine, and I don't know what that means. It means we're a family, real one, not just convenience." "Is that what you want?" Gideon looked at Pierre, this woman who'd survived everything Montana could throw at her, who'd taken the land Cyrus tried to steal and built something worthwhile, who'd made Gideon stop running and start living. "Yeah," he said, "that's what I want." Clara kissed him. Longer this time, deeper. The kind of kiss that said, "This is real. We're real." They had a daughter in February 1888, named her Violet after Clara's mother. Owen Sutherland had left Devil's Creek a month after the trial. Judge Carson had awarded him compensation for risking his life, $500, and a letter of commendation. Owen used the money to buy a small ranch near Canyon Springs, away from Cyrus's ghost and the memories that haunted Devil's Creek. Last Clara heard, he'd married a schoolteacher from Cheyenne and had twin girls. He wrote once a year, always ending with the same line, "Thank you for letting me be part of something that mattered." Some men needed to leave to heal. Clara understood that. She'd kept the letter he sent on Patrick's first birthday, a simple note congratulating her on her son's health and thanking Gideon for teaching him that courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about doing the right thing anyway. Montana Territory, 1925. The old man sat on the porch of a ranch house that had grown over 40 years from a simple cabin into something substantial. 2 stories, wide porch, a barn that could hold 20 horses and usually did. Behind him through the open door voices, his daughter Violet arguing with her husband about politics. His grandson Patrick's boy named Emmett after the grandfather he'd never met trying to referee. But the old man ignored them. He was watching the sunset, the way it painted the Rocky Mountains gold and red and purple, the way it had looked every evening for 69 years of Montana living. Grandpa, the voice belonged to Thomas, Violet's youngest, 18 years old, heading to university in the fall. Smart kid, wanted to be a lawyer. What is it, boy? Mom said you were going to tell me about Grandma, about how you met. Gideon, because that's who the old man was, 69 years old now. White-haired and weathered but still solid, gestured to the chair beside him. Sit down, this'll take a while. Thomas sat, eager. Young people always were when old people started telling stories. Your grandmother, Clara, Gideon began, was the strongest person I ever knew. And I met her the same day her husband was murdered by a corrupt sheriff who wanted to steal her land. Thomas's eyes widened. Murdered. Murdered. 3 men total. Emmett Brennan is Clara's first husband, Patrick's real father, and 2 other miners. Killed by rotten timber that a man named Cyrus Hartley sold to the mine to save money. Gideon told the story, all of it. The evidence, the mine, the cabin siege, the birth during a gunfight, the trial. Thomas listened, rapt. So you married her to protect her. Started that way, ended different. Gideon pulled out a photograph, faded now, showed a young woman holding a baby, strong face, determined eyes. I loved her, Thomas, not at first. First it was duty, respect, partnership. But over time, over years of building this ranch, raising children, surviving Montana winters and droughts, and every damn thing this territory could throw at us, it became love. What happened to her? She died 5 years ago. Gideon's voice caught. 61 years old, too young, but she lived more in those 61 years than most people manage in 90. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, 8 great-grandchildren. She died in her sleep, surrounded by family. That's all any of us can hope for. Thomas was quiet. Then, do you miss her? Every day, but missing someone doesn't mean regretting the life you built. We had 40 years, Clara and I. Good years, hard years, real years. Gideon looked at his grandson. You want to know the lesson? Yes, sir. The lesson is this: life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Your grandmother wasn't ready to be a widow at 23, wasn't ready to give birth during a gunfight, wasn't ready for any of it. But she did it anyway. And she didn't just survive, she lived, she fought. She built something that lasted. Gideon stood, old knees creaking, walked to the porch railing, looked out at the land Clara had defended with her life. This ranch, 400 acres now, started with 50. Clara bought every acre, negotiated every price, built every fence. She made this place what it is. And you, I stopped running long enough to help her build it. That's all any of us can do. Stop running, stand still, build something worth protecting. Thomas thought about this. The sheriff Cyrus Hartley. What happened to him? Died in prison, 1893. Nobody came to the funeral. Nobody mourned. He built an empire on corruption and murder, and when it fell, there was nothing left but dirt and graves. And the 3 minor, the ones who died, Gideon pointed to a hill visible from the porch. 3 headstones, well-maintained, flowers growing around them. Emmett Brennan, Samuel Cole, Thomas Wright. Clara had them moved here in 1900, said they deserved better than a pauper's cemetery. Said they died heroes, and heroes should be remembered. Thomas stared at the graves. She really loved him. Emmett. Her whole life, even after she loved me. Both things were true. Gideon smiled, sad but genuine. That's the thing about love, boy. It's not a limited resource. Clara loved Emmett. Clara loved me. She loved her children, her grandchildren, this land, all of it at once, all of it real. The sun had set completely now. Montana night settling in, stars beginning to show. I leave for university in 2 months, Thomas said quietly. Law school after that. I'll be gone 4 years, maybe longer. I know. Will you? The boy stopped, started again. Will you still be here when I come back? Gideon looked at his grandson, saw himself at 18, full of questions, full of fear disguised as confidence. I don't know, Thomas. I'm 69. Your grandmother made it to 61. Maybe I'll make it longer, maybe not. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. But this place will be here, this land, these stories. And you carry them forward. That's how we defeat men like Cyrus Hartley. Not by forgetting, by remembering, by telling the story of what your grandmother did, what Emmett did, what 3 miners did when they stood up and said, "This isn't right." Thomas nodded. I'll remember. Good, now go inside. Tell your mother I want roast for dinner. And tell her to stop arguing politics with her husband. She's going to give the man a heart attack. Thomas laughed, started toward the door, stopped. Grandpa, one more thing. What? Do you think Grandma would be proud of what we've built, of what the ranch became? Gideon thought about Clara, about the woman who'd crawled through mine shafts pregnant, who'd given birth in dirt and testified in court 2 weeks later, who'd taken land a corrupt sheriff tried to steal and turned it into a legacy. Your grandmother, Gideon said slowly, was the proudest woman in Montana Territory. Proud of her children, proud of this ranch, proud that 3 dead miners didn't die for nothing. He smiled. So yes, I think she'd be proud. Not because everything was perfect, but because we kept fighting, kept building, kept choosing to live instead of just survive. Thomas went inside. Gideon stayed on the porch watching the stars come out over Montana mountains that had been there before him and would be there after. He thought about Emmett Brennan, who died doing the right thing. About Clara, who'd spent 40 years making sure that death mattered. About Fletcher, who'd taught him that running was easier, but standing still was better. About 3 miners in 3 graves on a hill remembered. And about himself, Gideon Rivers, 69 years old, former Texas Ranger, former deputy, former runner. Now just a man who'd stopped moving long enough to build something worth keeping. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of horses and hay and summer grass. From inside, Violet called Dad dinner. Gideon turned toward the house, toward warmth and family and the sound of his daughter's voice calling him home. He looked back once more at the mountains, at the land Clara had fought for, at the graves of 3 men who'd made a different choice than running. We did it, Clara, he whispered to the wind. We built something that lasted. The wind didn't answer. It didn't need to. The ranch stood, the story lived, the graves were tended. That was answer enough. Gideon went inside to dinner, to family, to the life he'd built by standing still. And somewhere in Montana Territory night, if you listened close, you could almost hear it, the sound of a woman's laughter. Clara Brennan, who'd won her war and lived to tell about it, who'd taught a drifter cowboy that honor wasn't about never falling. It was about getting up every time, no matter how hard the ground. Epilogue. The headstone was simple granite, no flourishes, just facts. Gideon Rivers, 1856 to 1928. Husband, father, friend, he stopped running. Next to it another stone, older, weathered but well-maintained. Clara Brennan Rivers, 1862 to 1923. Wife, mother, warrior. She refused to break, and 50 feet away on the hill overlooking the ranch, 3 more stones. Emmett Brennan, Samuel Cole Thomas Wright. They died standing. Thomas stood between the graves of his grandparents. Law degree fresh in his pocket, 22 years old, the world opening before him like a book. He'd come back for the funeral. Gideon had died in his sleep 3 months ago. Peaceful, surrounded by family, exactly how he'd wanted. At the service, Thomas had stood and told the story, the whole story. Devil's Creek, Cyrus Hartley, 3 dead miners, a pregnant widow who'd refused to accept injustice. Half the county had shown up. People who'd heard the tale from Gideon over the years. People who'd known Clara. People who understood that some stories matter more than the people who live them. Now alone at the graves, Thomas placed a hand on each headstone. I passed the bar exam, Grandpa, top of my class. Starting work at a firm in Helena next month. Civil rights cases, corruption prosecution, the kind of law you and Grandma believed in. The wind through the Montana grass was his only answer. I'm going to tell your story in courtrooms, in arguments before judges. Every time some sheriff or official thinks they're above the law, I'm going to tell them about Clara Brennan, about 3 miners, about what happens when good people stand up. He stood, brushed dirt from his knees, looked out at the ranch, 400 acres of good Montana land, still raising horses, still profitable, still standing. Thank you, he said to the graves, to his grandparents, to the 3 miners who died 43 years ago. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Thomas walked back down the hill toward the ranch house where his mother waited, where dinner was ready, where family gathered and stories were told, and the legacy continued. Behind him, the grave stood silent in Montana sun. But if you listened, really listened, you could hear it. The echo of rifles firing in defense of what's right. The sound of a baby's first cry in the wilderness. The voice of a woman telling a judge, "That's still murder, even if you don't pull a trigger." And beneath it all, quieter but no less real, the sound of a man who'd spent his life running, finally saying, "I'm staying." Some stories end. This one just kept going.